So let's get into our next session on sourcing candidates in a remote world. We have joining us Kah Seng Tay, Shauna Geraghty, and Mike Pinkowsky. And so what's really special about this session is that all three of our speakers here bring perspectives that share both depth and breadth from across the recruiting ecosystem. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that between the three of them, they've either done it or they've built the tool that also enables others to do it. So let me introduce you to them. We'll welcome up and we'll kick this session off. So Kah Seng is general manager and senior engineering leader at Airtable and has built and scaled teams at places like Quora and Drive.ai. Mike is the head of engineering at Gem and brings his perspective both as an engineering leader and as somebody who is building recruiting and talent acquisition software. And Shauna is SVP and head of people operations, or head of people and operations at Talkdesk. And she's helped launch 7 global offices and scale Talkdesk to over 1,600 employees. So with sourcing, between the three of them, they've either done it or they've built the tool that enables others to do it. So Kah Seng, Mike, Shauna, welcome. It is so great to see you all. How is everybody doing?
Doing great. Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Awesome. So the last session, sourcing was by far one of the challenges that came up the most. And so we'd asked people to share a little bit about what's been going on, what are they facing, what are they looking for help. So you three are going to be helping solve a really critical problem for people right now. I think that to start, because all three of you have I think such interesting or unique and different perspectives on what's going on with this emerging world of hiring, I would love to start off by getting a sense of what are some of the trends or challenges that you're seeing with sourcing right now that you are most interested in? And Shauna, I'd love to invite you up to share first. And then Kah Seng and Mike, would love to have you jump in with your perspective. And so Shauna, what are the trends or challenges that you're paying attention to most right now?
Sure, and I'll answer that question in context of the audience and what they care about the most. Our R&D population is primarily based out of Portugal, and historically Portugal was a relatively untapped market in terms of competition for talent within the R&D sector. With COVID, that's changed completely, and so some of the challenges we're facing now is our competitors for talent can be anywhere. They can be located anywhere. Our talent is amazing. And now our talent can also work anywhere. And so competition is fierce. We've seen from a sourcing perspective, our conversion rates significantly decline. And we're also seeing for the first time ever, a leaky funnel. And so part of what we've done is we've thought really quickly about how we can be agile in optimizing our EVP and also shifting from more of a gating model. Historically, we deployed a gating model throughout our process and shifted to a selling model. So, in a word, I will say, or in a phrase, I will say it's now a candidate's market.
Cool. Yeah. I certainly see that, especially because Airtable isn't necessarily fully remote yet. It has led to, certain candidate preferences being highly, amplified in this kind of remote type of world. For me, the most recent challenge really has been the fact that I think not everyone is aware what the timescales of when things would reopen. Across the whole last year, I think even following the trends of vaccinations and understanding the market, understanding where trends are headed for whether companies would be fully remote, whether we would actually adopt something that's a hybrid model. That has led to us not being offered candidates the preference of their choice, right? Like if they cared for fully remote or in hybrid kind of environment, we are kind of in this middle zone where we haven't yet figured things out. And so there's a lot of essentially dynamism at play. We have to be very adaptable and try to wade through all that kind of ambiguity to try to offer what candidates would actually like. So yeah,
I think in my conversations with a few counterparts at other companies, big and small actually, where these companies are transitioning to distributed workforces or are going fully remote or hybrid, the engineering leaders actually think that by being able to source outside of the traditional tech hubs, that it's going to be a massive windfall, and they're going to have all of these candidates that they can go after. And a lot of them are actually finding that the opposite is true. And so, it's actually not getting easier. And I think, to build on Shauna's point, it's getting more difficult. It's, very competitive. And I think it actually underscores the importance of nurturing candidates and sourcing them and finding them before they're actively looking, because when they do start actively engaging with companies, the competition is so fierce. And there's a leaky funnel out there. People are dropping out because companies are swooping in, and it's very competitive.
Mike, the point you brought up, I think, is really interesting about, like, it's underscoring the necessity to nurture relationships throughout the whole process. And so I wanted to kind of open up to you three to learn a little bit more about interesting tactics you're seeing to be effective. And so I was wondering, I think specifically for that, because I think the reaction I typically get from different engineering leaders that we work with is that requires a lot of work. That seems really hard, and that requires a lot of time. Are there either tactics to make that more efficient, or are there other interesting tactics that you're seeing be effective that kind of fall under that relationship building umbrella?
I can go first because it kind of builds on Mike's response. So personalization is key. Personalization, and also creating velocity in your process or in the funnel, because if we can put a candidate through a process in under a week, that's a competitive advantage in a really aggressive market. The way we've solved for that, or attempted to solve for that, is taking a very structured approach to not only selecting our target market or our candidates, but also crafting messaging that's resonating with those individuals. So just from a high level, we've created personas, and for each persona, we think about our EVP and whether or not there's an opportunity to align that EVP a bit more with that persona, and then create content that we believe will resonate with that persona. And then we use tools like Gem and others to put that individual through a multi-touch, multi-cadence, and multi-person process, so that there are a number of different touch points on a number of different platforms. Most of those are automated through Gem. And that, to us, has been the most effective way to drive traction at top of the funnel.
That's great. Yeah, for us, and I treat sourcing here as sort of like a combination of both, like a referral pipeline, as well as outreach by our recruiting teams. And since I do represent engineering leaders at the company, a lot of my efforts are trying to direct like engineers to figure out how they can best reach out to their network, right? Both candidates that they are aware of and worked with before, but also those that are farther out and farther removed. And some things we've been trying are like organizing like virtual tech talks in this kind of remote world. Having a kind of topic and inviting guest speakers and effectively inviting friends for a particular topic in mind, right? Like, this used to be something you could do in the offices, but in this time it's just a lot easier to maybe do it remotely and invite a lot more folks. We also try to have higher engagement at the earlier stages of the funnel, in terms of like hiring managers actually conducting pitch calls and outreach, engineers as well as recruiters showing like product demos of our company's product. Effectively trying to make that early part of the funnel like more personalized to what Shauna mentioned, like, and highly engaging for the candidates. So even if they don't necessarily want the job, they can kind of walk away with something, either a lesson that we've shared maybe in the tech talk, or knowledge about Airtable's product and how to use it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to keeping potential candidates interested and engaged, once you sort of have that initial conversation, but they're not ready to interview yet, keeping them engaged is pretty important. And I think that companies that play to their strengths tend to do well when it comes to nurturing. So Gem is a company that's returning to the office. We have a space opening up in a few weeks, and we are going for that in-person experience. And historically, we've always been pretty strong with our in-office culture, events that we do. And so 15 months ago, we would invite candidates to the office, different events that we had. And we're actually starting to do that again in safe settings, obviously, primarily outdoors. But, if we're having small hangouts or lunches outdoors or in a park, there are candidates who are really excited about that opportunity to come back into an office, interact with people. And so, there are a lot of companies going remote and distributed. Gem isn't one of those, actually, although I do work with a lot of companies that are taking that route, but we're sort of owning who we are and putting ourselves out there. And I think that sort of acts as a beacon for candidates who do want to come in person, but it also means that when we have events, like, we are trying to play that up. And so when it comes to companies that have built really strong remote cultures, thinking about what makes those cultures strong and interesting, owning that in your outreach. If you're having events that candidates can come to get to know the people or the product better, I think, those types of things are great.
So true.
I think, go ahead, Kah Seng.
Oh, no, I was just saying that's so true. Like, as soon as things reopen, like, we are looking forward to that. And, hosting things in the office in a safe way would be awesome for, future prospective candidates, for sure.
So one thing I wanted to kind of connect the dots on, so Shauna and Mike, Shauna, you'd mentioned, some of the practices around reaching out to candidates and having different touch points. And then Mike, you were mentioning some of the methods for people to reach out. I think one insight I'm getting from different engineering leaders is that some of the sort of standard 3-touch campaigns, the response rates are dropping off pretty tremendously. And so the big question is, like, how do you get people's attention? Like, and where can you get their attention? And so what I was trying to think about is, like, are there certain channels that you all are seeing to be more effective, or are there certain subject lines or things that are actually catching people's attention and causing increased response?
I think that's where the science comes in for us, right? And that's why we love platforms like Gem that are able to track conversion rates and allow us to test different subject lines that might resonate differently with different markets. For us, it also really goes back to honing in on our EVP. So what is compelling about this opportunity, and how do we make sure that we can highlight that in not only the subject line, but the first few sentences of the outreach in a way that is compelling to the individuals that we're reaching out to. I would say also something that that sometimes folks will overlook is we spend a lot of time after developing the persona. We call it an ICP, so developing our ideal candidate profile. Understand exactly what that is, not only for the organization but for the department and team. And if you can be very granular about that, then the rest of the messaging usually can fall into place, right? Because we know exactly what we're looking for. We can create targeted messages that might be compelling for that individual, and we'll be able to include that information in the subject line or within the body. Some people are attracted to growth. Some people are attracted to stability. Some people are attracted to a complex challenge or product. And so we want to know exactly what that is, and then get very specific and granular with their messaging, and then continue to test it and iterate over time.
Yeah, I think having the tools that allow you to measure and improve are essential here. And obviously I work at Gem and we help provide some of those functionalities, but you can't improve what you can't measure. In my experience, I think things that I've seen work when it comes to standing out from the crowd in those candidate outreaches, first and foremost, if you're reaching out to an engineer, keep the email short. I think, we see a lot more engineering leaders actually composing and sending these emails themselves. And I think if it sort of looks like it's a multi-paragraph, highly produced email with tons of hyperlinks and images, it might not pass the smell test for an engineer, but if it's relatively short, I think that is going to stand out. And if it gets to the point, people are actually going to hear what you're saying. When it comes to subject lines and trying to get people to open, there's a lot of different things to try. And again, I think the important thing is sort of look at what's working for you with the data that you have available to you. But if you're reaching out to, let's say, a referral or someone who is in network, trying to find a common name that you can drop, I think really does help you stand out. And so, if I've worked with someone and we share a mutual connection that I know to be pretty strong to both of us, if you can find a natural way to highlight that in the subject line, I think that is going to really help you stand out.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah, for us, obviously I don't do too much of the direct sourcing myself in terms of using the tools and doing it at scale. But one thing that's I think interesting is that we offer like credits to our customers for the product, right? Like it's a custom acquisition. It's like easy for them to try the product before they pay for it. And we've been trying something, to offer this to candidates as well, right? Like it's something that excites them. We especially for the referrals. For engineers who's just started working at Airtable, we want them to have a reason to go and talk to a colleague they haven't talked to in a while, right? So we want to offer this kind of interesting perk where, as an employee of Airtable, I now have this special lifetime free plan to use Airtable. And I can only give it out to a few folks here and there. Would you like to have my be part of my plan, right, or something like that? And the thing here is that obviously one is a reason to go do the outreach, like it's engaging, it's like free, something's free, right? And but also like I think it helps get us along candidates who are engaged for the long term, right? So even is a long lead time kind of outreach. We don't necessarily care for a transactional hire right away, but for a candidate who can kind of understand the product, eventually, fall in love with it, understand the things we're building, over time, and then decide to kind of apply or reach out to us later. So I think that's something that we found to be pretty successful.
When you were sharing that, Kah Seng, I think I almost misheard you, because when you were sharing, like, you share trials with folks, I was like, oh, are you trialing people in the company and just like, come on and join? And I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because Shauna was mentioning getting people in the door within a week and that being a really big competitive advantage. And like the trialing seems like a big way to get people in. So just opportunity to clarify if I misheard that.
Yeah, no, it's not trialing the folks, but the software, the service itself. That's right.
Awesome. So we have time for a couple more quick questions, and for everyone listening in, we have time for some Q&A. So share your questions in the chat. But I want to talk about two things. One is like this: where are the secret locations that you're sourcing candidates right now? Or are there interesting ways that like people are finding candidates? You don't have to give up your secrets, but please, there's a lot of people who would love to hear them. But the other one thing is really interesting is a lot of people have been sharing they're struggling finding senior engineering talent, and that those types of candidates seem to be the most challenging to find. And so wanted to understand, like, how are you sourcing those types of candidates? But so let's start first. Are there certain locations or markets or sources that you found to be really effective in actually having that top of funnel sourcing?
For us, it's referrals. And so what we've been able to do is typically we see anywhere between 30 to 45% of our new hires coming from our referral source. But also what we've noticed is that the highest quality talent is also coming from our referral source, which makes intuitive sense, right? If you're thriving within our organization, you're more likely to refer someone. And if you're not doing well, or if you're not a top performer, you're less likely to. So what we've done is we've created structured outbound referral syncs where we'll identify an individual who's a top performer within the organization. We'll pull individuals from their LinkedIn connections that match our ICP. We'll come prepared, or our recruiters will come prepared to a meeting, and we'll let them know what the referral bonus is. We'll share all of the outbound cadence with them, and we'll ask them if they're interested in participating. So that to us has been the best channel. In terms of geo and location, we've been fairly geographically confined to certain areas within EMEA. And so we're typically looking for countries that have a similar cost of living as Portugal. And that list is really finite. My suggestion is, because if you are a company that is in a remote capacity currently, or potentially in the future, if you have that ability, to first look at your infrastructure to make sure you can support hiring talent in a new geo, because that's a challenge. But if you can, and you have that ability, to start unlocking new geos outside of your core headquarters or base.
Cool. Yeah, for us, I think something that's traditionally underlooked is essentially like startup founder profiles. So I think, over the last decade, there has been a lot of interest in startups, and, a lot of folks have decided to go and stake it out on their own, right? Maybe after college or after a few years in the workforce. And, several of these startups do fail, and ultimately there is a wide range of, company names and experiences, etc. But we found that that pool, while it's pretty hard to maybe traditionally find them on LinkedIn, but if we can actually get to those candidates, they tend to have a breadth of experience that actually do work at our kind of scaling and growth stage of our startup. Airtable, even though we're at Series E stage, it still needs a lot of engineering talent that has that kind of breadth, ability to ramp up quickly on multiple domains, and not necessarily specialists in any particular one role. So if you can get to just startup founders, ex-startup founders, etc., that seems to be a unique archetype that I think seems to be underlooked.
I think, to sort of build on that too, I have noticed a decent number of folks who weren't necessarily founding a startup over the past year, but maybe spent a lot of time just working on side projects. And I think they were sort of underemployed, but now they're sort of coming back to the market. And so if you can find out who those people were that, maybe took the past year, a couple months off, they are looking for jobs and they're ready. Some of them are senior, some of them are junior. There's a pretty good mix there, I would say. And I want to also say that I think, referrals are also huge. Can't emphasize it enough, especially at an early stage. If your company doesn't have the name recognition of a Facebook or even, Airtable or Notion or Clubhouse, all these companies that have that household name recognition, you need that support from referrals or from communities or networks that you're a part of to have some social proof for your company. Otherwise, who are you? And so I think trying to find a way to bridge that connection and find a connection with the candidate you're trying to reach out to, especially if they're senior, really helps a lot.
Yeah, that's right. And actually for senior candidates, one thing I would like to add is that oftentimes it can seem as if you have this role that you're looking to fill, and you go through all kinds of candidates and try to place that role. But I think for senior candidates, you need to be a bit more flexible about adapting that the hole you have or the gap that you're trying to fill to the candidate profile. And I think we've definitely found that for senior candidates, it's not we're not willing to move or anything. It's often a dialogue, right? Understanding this kind of strengths, maybe shifting what we're looking for to kind of fit that profile. We see that for senior leadership, senior ICs, as well as manager roles that we kind of need to do this for.
There's one interesting trend that got mentioned in the previous session that was noted by Maya Josbachvili, who was the former head of people at Stripe. And she was mentioning that right now, with some of the people she's interviewed, there's a lower barrier to having quick 15-minute meetings with folks. And so the ability to do direct outreach and have shorter meetings and to tend relationships over the long term seems to be something that it's easier to do now than beforehand. I'm bringing this up because I want to ask about how do you find sourcing senior engineers? Because I think what's the challenge a lot of people are facing is where do I find them? And I think a lot of folks are falling into the trap of nobody's applying to our role versus actively doing outreach to find and target people. And so I was wondering if there were any active tactics that you've observed or found to be effective yourself to find those more senior engineering candidates.
I can share. I think Mike touched on this, but I'll expand upon it. So we do a number of different virtual events. So virtual events where we're showcasing our internal talent, but also meetups. And there are two strategies that we run in parallel, where we will identify individuals that we're interested in hiring and ask them to join the panel. So as a panelist and as an expert. And we'll also reach out to individuals that we want to nurture, take a long tail strategy to nurture and invite them to be a guest, because that is a soft ask, right? That's an easy ask. We're giving them, we're adding value. We're thinking about a topic that might educate them, that might help them create a bigger community. And so we're not asking them, do you want to work for us? And then during the event, our recruiters are there to provide, structure and scaffolding and support, but we're not actively recruiting in the event. So the recruiters are running the infrastructure. They're sending the outreach messaging and the reminders and the follow-up messaging, but they're not there kind of actively recruiting those candidates. But the one thing that's really important is that we set targets for ourselves. Number of responses, number of attendees, and number of conversions. And so the goal, everyone's goal really truly is to create a nice, rich community, but the ultimate goal is to be able to see some conversion to active candidates after the event.
I was going to say, I think as far as, finding the senior candidates, there isn't some secret social network out there that, we're going on and like all the senior engineers are hanging out. But LinkedIn Recruiter is tried and true. I think it's a great source, especially if you know how to work some of the search filters on there. I would say as far as like, sort of just entering into conversation and getting some of these senior engineers interested, you can even just pitch your initial outreach as more of a conversation and less of an outright, hey, we're recruiting. I think one thing that I found to be effective is saying, hey, do you just want to have a chat about, let's say for an engineering leadership chat, or do you want to have like a, senior engineering type of chat, just to sort of pick their brain a little bit to see what's important to them. But then I think a lot of these more senior folks that are open to having conversations, they also want to feel out the market. And if you sort of put it in front of them in a low pressure type of way, where it's just a conversation, I think that works. Compared with a year and a half ago, I'm doing a lot more Zoom calls. I think the barrier to entry is a lot lower. People are more comfortable sort of getting on camera with, someone they've never talked with before, but I think it also helps build the connection with that individual because you can get a lot more over Zoom than on the phone. And then finally, I think another way just to lower the barrier to entry, a lot of people use Calendly, can definitely recommend including that in, any sort of outreach you do in Gem or otherwise. And yeah, it can be quite helpful just to make it easier for someone to book time on your calendar.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, for us, I think we do double down heavily on referrals for senior candidates. And I think the strategy that we do is sort of to start at the very top, like go for the most senior profiles, and try to pay a lot of attention to that hire, right? Like put a lot of senior leadership time in closing the hire, in outreaching. But once you actually get like someone very senior, like I think what we've found is that, they act as talent magnets, right? A lot of people have known them. They're well known in industry or in their former companies, maybe even multiple companies that they've worked at before, and they then act as like someone that for other senior engineers will look up to and want to work with in the future. And I think we've done that successfully with various folks from many different companies, and it has led to this like kind of waterfall effect potentially, or a follow-on effect. That's possibly one approach. I think another is to, I think pitch the opportunity as a kind of like, going back to the startup profile, analogy of candidates that may be underlooked at. I think like trying to pitch the opportunity as something like, co-founding an opportunity within the company to work on this thing, right? Like ultimately, I think senior engineers, it's hard to maybe engage if they don't know enough about the company or there isn't a maybe super compelling opportunity for their expertise and experience, and having craft that messaging to be something impactful and meaningful within your company could potentially help. Obviously, it depends on the situation or company, but we found that it could actually help.
A really interesting comment about like the changing priorities for senior leaders and to really craft and personalize your response to address that. And I also really appreciate the thoughts around like approaching from a perspective of adding value, building a relationship, don't lead with the ask, and also lower the friction, include a Calendly link. And it sounds like somebody needs to build the talent magnet network so that it's really easy to find those talent magnets to create some of those waterfall effects. We've got time for a closing question that I wanted to ask you both. But really quickly, Michael Heller from the chat had a quick clarifying or like follow-up question for Kah Seng and Mike. So with your companies making the decision to be in person, I think the way I wanted to ask this was like, I think, do you find that people are sort of, is it filtering candidates and that you're finding people that are more interested in office work and that's their like work style preference? Is that something that's happening? Do you feel like it's filtering out candidates and is that having an impact, or do you feel like you're still able to identify enough sourcing candidates?
Yeah, I guess I can go first. But going back to that first thing about how it's, I guess, a new recent challenge, I do think that just understanding that our companies, like our engineers at the company today, and their preferences, it's pretty wide ranging. Like there are folks that want to be in the office, and there are folks that prefer not to be. And so we're trying to find ways to ultimately trial out different models and see what works for us in the long term. And we suspect there'll be something in between, and possibly even like some teams being a bit more frequent in the office and other teams not. So I think it's actually maybe a wash perhaps for the candidates, in that there are going to be some that will be excited and attracted to the model that we have, or the teams that fit that kind of model that they're looking for, as well as candidates that aren't. And I think that's why it's like really trying to mix and match and wade through the ambiguity, get them to fit to that team and that choice if it works for them. But I think it's not necessarily been a complete like loss or gain for us.
Yeah, I think as far as Gem is concerned, we have no shortage of engineers to talk with. Our decision acts as a sort of magnet for people that are looking for that. There are plenty of candidates that do want that in-person experience. Ultimately, this saves us time. It helps us attract candidates that are excited about returning to an office environment, but also helps people that aren't looking for that self-select out earlier.
Sure.
The thing that really stands out to me about that, like this is like if you're really clear about that, like you said, Mike, it saves time. So the takeaway sounds like no matter what the decision is, you just need to be really clear and upfront with the pathway that you're going, so that there's a sort of a clear expectation for candidates for those experiences.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, Shauna, Kah Seng, Mike, thank you both so much, or all three of you for your time. This was, I think, an incredibly compressed and rapid fire. Here are some really interesting ways to source. And so I hope a lot of folks are able to immediately apply a lot of these things. I can imagine there's going to be a lot of really cool events being planned and a lot of guests being asked to speak. If you are planning an event and want guests, take a look at the people in the community. I'm sure they would be incredible guests to have. But Shauna, Kah Seng, Mike, thank you three all so much, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
Doctor.
Take care.